Hey, speaking of that outside noise, Sophie, your teammate, Sophie came out with
Oh, thank you. Have a good day.
Wow. I was going to bet all the money in the world that it was this old gal right here on the left that follows everybody around that shut this thing down. You created another controversy. Yeah, shutting down this press conference because Outkick was not your chosen, approved WNBA media. You just created another controversy.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that I would say that I'm educated enough from a scientific standpoint.
Not sure what education has to do with this, to be honest. Not sure what education has to do with it.
There's a moment in sports that defines what leadership actually looks like and what it doesn't. It happened in an Indiana Fever press conference when a reporter asked a straightforward question about a player's public comments. The head coach's response wasn't a thoughtful answer or even a controversial take. It was silence followed by a walkout. But here's what makes this so much worse than just one awkward moment. It's what happened after. A player who spoke her mind got benched, booed at home, and left completely alone by the organization that's supposed to have her back. Meanwhile, her own coach couldn't even say her name in support when the cameras were rolling, and it mattered most. This isn't just about one press conference anymore. It's about a pattern of organizational cowardice that's been building for weeks, and it's starting to expose something much darker about how the WNBA handles its players when things get uncomfortable. Sophie Cunningham answered a question honestly and became a target for it. Now she's paying the price, while the people who claim to lead her team look the other way. Let's break down exactly what happened, why it matters, and what it says about the state of professional women's basketball right now. Sophie Cunningham didn't wake up one morning planning to become the center of a national firestorm. She was just doing her job as a professional athlete, being interviewed by a reporter who asked her about her perspective on women's sports. The question itself wasn't designed to trap her or catch her off guard. It was direct, it was fair, and it was the kind of thing reporters ask players about constantly. But something about the way Sophie answered changed everything that came after it. When asked about biological males competing in women's sports, she didn't dance around it or give some carefully crafted non-answer that would offend nobody and mean nothing. She said what she actually believed. She talked about protecting the integrity of women's sports, about making sure the competition stayed fair for the athletes that Title IX was built to protect. She talked about loving everyone, while also believing that certain lines needed to exist in women's athletics. It was a measured response, thoughtful even, but it was honest in a way that most celebrities and athletes go out of their way to avoid. What happened next showed exactly why so many people choose silence instead. The interview didn't just get coverage, it exploded. Suddenly Sophie's name was everywhere, not because of anything she'd done on the basketball court, but because she'd expressed a viewpoint that a lot of people quietly hold but almost never say out loud. The media picked it up. Social media picked it up. And within days, Sophie Cunningham had become the lightning rod for a much larger conversation happening in sports and in culture. But here's the crucial part that often gets lost in all the noise. Sophie didn't attack anyone. She didn't call out a teammate or a rival player by name. She didn't say anything hateful or reckless. She simply answered a straightforward question with a straightforward answer, standing behind what she actually believed without apologizing for it or trying to soften it into something safer. That would have been enough to handle on its own. But then came the follow-up interviews, and Sophie did something that most athletes would never do in her position. When reporters came back with more questions, expecting her to walk it back or water it down, she didn't. She said the same thing again. She said, "I said what I said." Not in an aggressive way, not in a way that was designed to provoke anyone. Just with the kind of quiet confidence that comes from actually believing what you're saying and not being willing to abandon it the moment things get uncomfortable. That's rare in professional sports. Most players, when faced with backlash over a statement, immediately go into damage control mode. They apologize, they clarify, they reframe. They do whatever it takes to make the controversy go away as quickly as possible.
It's on that same vein, investor with ESPN, you talked about wanting to protect young girls who shouldn't have to go against biological men. Just can you expand your viewpoint on that?
I mean, I think I said what I said. I think it's kind of common sense. And I think I'll always believe in that. I think it's really important to protect children. And that's little girls who are also involved in that category. And so I stand on what I said, and I always believe that. You know, I don't know. I'm not a very political person, but I do have beliefs. I have morals, and I'll always stand on those and be true to who I am. And I think people are going to take it how they want to take it, but I've never even really said anything about that. And so when it comes just to protecting young girls in sport and women in sport, I feel very strongly about that. I think that's why you have Title IX. That's why you have some of the greats in women's sports. If Title IX and women's sports were protected, then you wouldn't hear about any type of women in sport. And so I think in the future, it's just really important to protect. Like I said, I extend love, and I don't dislike anyone. Like, I think there is room for absolutely everyone here, and I think there's room to love everyone. And I truly think when you get people in the same room and you have conversations, you actually have a lot in common with a lot of people. And so I'm there to love. But I'm also there to love biological women, and I think that there are rights that need to be protected. And like I said, I'm going to stand true to that. I'll never falter in my beliefs in that, but I have never once said I hated the trans community. Like I said, I think there's space for everyone.
Sophie did none of that. She stood by her words. She even reached out to the teenage fans who had shown up to a game wearing pro-women's sports gear to support her, telling them they were doing heroic work and showing the kind of integrity that the adults around her seemed to be abandoning. Think about what that took. She was already facing national scrutiny for her comments. She was already the subject of heated debate across social media and sports media. And instead of trying to blend back into the background, she doubled down on her conviction and supported the people who were standing with her. That's not cowardice. That's not recklessness either. That's just someone being true to what they believe in, even when the easier path would be to disappear for a while and let the story blow over on its own. But the story didn't blow over. It got bigger. And what happened next is where this stops being just another controversy and starts being a case study in how organizations handle loyalty or fail to handle it. Because while Sophie was standing firm in her convictions, showing the kind of courage that you'd think an organization would celebrate in one of its own players, the Indiana Fever, and specifically her head coach Stephanie White, were about to make a choice that would change how everyone saw this situation. They were about to choose silence over support, and that choice would echo through the rest of the season in ways that nobody in that organization seemed prepared for. Sophie had answered a question honestly. She'd stood behind her answer twice when pressed. She'd supported the fans who were supporting her. Now it was her organization's turn to show whether they actually believed in backing their own players, or whether they'd rather just wait for controversial moments to pass quietly without ever taking a stand. What happened next would answer that question pretty decisively, and the answer wasn't what anyone hoping for real leadership would have wanted to hear. The press conference itself was routine on the surface. Indiana Fever head coach Stephanie White was answering questions from reporters the way coaches do after games or during media availability. It was supposed to be a normal day, a chance for her to discuss the team, talk about upcoming games, and handle whatever questions came her way. But somewhere in that press conference, a reporter asked the question that everyone in the room already knew was coming. They asked about Sophie Cunningham's comments on women's sports. They asked what Stephanie White thought about her player's position. They asked whether she supported Sophie's stance. It was a basic journalistic question, the kind of thing a coach should be prepared to answer, especially when it's about one of her own players who's already been in the headlines all week. What happened next wasn't a thought-out answer. It wasn't a carefully prepared statement or even a rushed non-answer that technically says something while explaining nothing. It was worse than that. Stephanie White sat there, started to speak, fumbled through some words about not being educated enough on the science of the issue, and then made the decision that would define this entire controversy for weeks to come. She stood up. She said something short about being done with the day. And she walked out of the room while the cameras were still rolling, not because she was physically ill, not because of a fire alarm or an emergency, not because she had somewhere urgent to be. She walked out because she couldn't handle being asked a direct question about a direct comment her own player had made publicly. She physically removed herself from the situation rather than say a single supportive sentence about Sophie Cunningham. Think about what that moment actually communicated to everyone watching. In the span of maybe 30 seconds, Stephanie White managed to send a message that was louder and more damaging than anything she could have said in response to the question. She signaled that standing by her player wasn't worth the discomfort of answering a tough question. She signaled that when things got heated or controversial, the people in charge would rather disappear than face it directly. She signaled that if you speak your mind in this organization and create any kind of controversy, you're going to be on your own. That's not what leadership is supposed to look like, and fans caught it immediately. The moment got clipped. It got shared across social media. It went viral in the way that these things do. And now, instead of being a minor controversy about Sophie's comments, the story had a new angle. The coach who abandoned her own player in front of the cameras. What makes this even worse is that Stephanie White had every opportunity to handle this differently. She could have said something simple like, "I support all my players and their right to speak their minds." She could have kept it that basic and moved on. Nobody would have blinked twice at an answer like that. It's boring, it's safe, it's exactly the kind of thing coaches say all the time when they want to stay out of controversial waters without completely dodging the question. But instead of doing that, she froze up. She started giving what looked like word salad, throwing out phrases about not being educated enough on the science and talking about various levels of sport and different governing bodies. It was the verbal equivalent of running in circles while trying to avoid making any actual point. And when that didn't work, when she realized that people could see right through what she was doing, she just left. She didn't excuse herself politely. She didn't say she had another commitment. She just walked away from the podium.
What resources does the league provide for you guys as players to kind of help you try to filter through some of the hate and negative things that come through on social media?
I think that, honestly, I don't know what our league does to help with that. If they really do anything, you can put out statements as much as you want, but at the end of the day, you're in an entertainment business. That's when mental toughness comes in. If you're going to live by praise, you're going to die by the hate. And so I think that's on the individual person to have mental toughness. Some people can deal with it, some people can't. And I think you can see the ones who can. And unfortunately, there are some who can't. And it's not beneficial to them. But you can't control what other people say or what other people do. All you can do is control yourself, how you treat people. Speak up, and support people who, maybe don't have a voice or don't have the courage to do that, but it's one of those things. You're in the entertainment business and you have to expect it.
Leaving the room half confused and half annoyed at what they'd just witnessed. It was the kind of moment that nobody forgets because it was so clearly a moment of someone choosing avoidance over accountability. The cameras caught every second of it. Her body language made it obvious that she was uncomfortable. You could see the hesitation, the squirming, the internal struggle playing out in real time. And then came the exit. For Sophie, sitting somewhere watching her coach do that must have felt like a knife in the back. She'd stood up in front of cameras, said what she believed, and stood by it when pressed. She'd shown the kind of courage that you'd think would earn respect from the people who are supposed to lead your team. But instead of getting support, she got abandoned. Her own coach couldn't even stay in the room long enough to say something supportive about her. That's not a small moment. That's a defining moment for any player on that roster, watching to see whether their organization actually has their back when things get difficult. And the answer Stephanie White gave by walking out was clear: don't count on it. What happened on the court after that press conference is where this story stopped being about controversy and started being about consequences. Sophie Cunningham had played well all season. She was a consistent scoring threat off Indiana's bench, exactly the kind of reliable role player that teams build around when they're trying to compete. Just weeks before all of this happened, she dropped 33 points across a single back-to-back stretch, looking like one of the best role players in the entire league. She was performing at a level that should have earned her serious playing time in close games, in tight moments, in situations where her team needed reliable scoring. Then the interview dropped. Then the backlash came. Then her coach walked out of a press conference instead of defending her, and suddenly, Sophie's minutes started shrinking. It wasn't a small change either. This wasn't a slight adjustment in rotation or a one-game blip where circumstances happened to work out that way. Her playing time dropped noticeably, to the point where fans watching during broadcasts were literally asking out loud during the game where she was, and why she wasn't out there in close matches. When Indiana lost at home, not long after the interview aired, Sophie did what she'd always done. She took accountability. She said she'd own it, being the team player she's always been. But people watching closely noticed what was actually happening. Her role on the team had shrunk in a way that didn't match what her performance had been earning her just weeks earlier. Across the most recent stretch of games, her minutes dipped to numbers that didn't make basketball sense for a player who'd been one of the more consistent scoring threats available off the bench. Players performing at the level Sophie was performing at don't usually see their role shrink dramatically for no basketball reason. Coaches don't suddenly bench their best bench scorers because of something that happened off the court. That's not how professional sports work, or at least, that's not how it's supposed to work. But when the timing lines up exactly with a national media firestorm, when the minutes drop right after a player becomes controversial, people start noticing. They start connecting dots. And they start asking whether this is really just about basketball or whether something else is actually going on. When reporters actually asked Stephanie White about the sudden dip in Sophie's playing time, the answers got vague fast. There was no clear injury explanation. There was no clean basketball reasoning about tough matchups or defensive schemes forcing a rotation change. Just the usual coach speak about managing the group and doing what's best for the team. The kind of answer that technically says something while explaining absolutely nothing at all. It's the verbal equivalent of a shrug, and everyone listening knew it. Maybe the minutes really were just about load management or fatigue or any number of legitimate basketball reasons. Coaches manage rotations constantly, and sometimes a dip in playing time genuinely is nothing more than strategic adjustment. But the timing kept making fans uneasy every time they thought about it. Because here's what the pattern looked like from the outside. A player says something calm and reasonable when a reporter asks her a direct question. That player gets dragged through headlines calling her divisive and reckless for it. The same week the story breaks, that player's minutes get quietly trimmed. And nobody in the organization offers any explanation or basketball reason for why her role has suddenly shrunk. That's not a coincidence. That's a message. Whether anyone in the Fever organization intended to send that message or not, that's what got received. Think about what that does to a player's confidence. Sophie had shown up every day, played hard, earned her minutes through performance. And then suddenly, without explanation, without accountability, without anyone saying this was happening, her role disappeared. She's left trying to figure out whether she did something wrong on the court or whether this is punishment for speaking her mind off the court. That's an impossible position to put a player in, especially when you're not even willing to have an honest conversation about what's actually happening. And what made it worse was that nobody in the organization addressed it directly. The front office didn't come out and say that Sophie was getting reduced minutes. Stephanie White didn't explain it in a way that made basketball sense. They just let it happen, let the minutes disappear, and said nothing about it. That silence is its own kind of statement. It says that the organization is uncomfortable with what Sophie said enough to bench her, but not confident enough in that decision to actually defend it publicly. It's the worst of both worlds. Sophie gets punished, but the organization gets to pretend like it's not punishment, just rotation management. The fans weren't buying it though, and neither was Sophie. There's something uniquely painful about getting booed in your home arena. It's the place where you're supposed to feel supported, where fans are supposed to be on your side, where you're supposed to be able to just focus on playing the game without worrying about the crowd turning against you. But that's exactly what happened to Sophie Cunningham during Indiana's next home game. The moment she checked in, a section of fans booed her. Not scattered boos that you can dismiss as a few people. Audible, noticeable boos that everyone in the building could hear and that everyone watching on television could hear too. It was ugly, it was disrespectful, and it was the kind of moment that should have drawn an immediate response from the organization sitting right there on the bench. The coaching staff was there. The front office was in the building. Team leadership was present. This was their opportunity to shut that down immediately, to make it clear that their players deserve respect regardless of their personal views or political positions. This was the moment to stand up and say something, but they didn't. Not the coaching staff. Not the front office. Not a single teammate speaking up publicly afterward to say that what happened was wrong. Sophie stood out there and took it the same way she'd taken every other hit this month. Quietly, without complaint, without lashing out or making a scene. Because that's who she's always been on that roster. She's never been the type to let anyone script what she says or how she plays. She's never once apologized afterward for having a backbone. She just went out there, played basketball, and absorbed the disrespect from her own fans without saying anything about it. That takes a kind of mental toughness that honestly most people don't have. Most athletes would have had a response to that. Most would have made a statement afterward or confronted the situation directly. But Sophie, she just kept playing. Think about what that actually looks like from the outside, though. You have a player who said something calm and reasonable in an interview. That player gets dragged through headlines for saying it. That player gets her minutes quietly reduced. That player gets booed in her own home arena. And the people who are supposed to have her back say absolutely nothing. They don't address it. They don't defend her. They don't even acknowledge that it happened. They just let it happen and move on like it's normal, like this is just part of the job. This is where the pattern really starts to become undeniable. One moment alone could be an accident. One incident could be coincidence. Twice starts looking like an actual habit. But when you stack it all together, the press conference walkout, the minutes disappearing, the booing at home, the organizational silence, that's not a coincidence anymore. That's a pattern. That's a system. That's an organization that's choosing to allow its player to be treated this way without intervening. The league, for its part, provides statements about creating welcoming environments. The organization puts out their own statements about standing together and supporting their players. But statements are cheap. Actions are what matter. And the actions here were clear. Let your player get booed at home, benched in close games, abandoned by her coach in front of cameras, and don't say anything about any of it. That sends a message to the rest of the locker room, too. It tells every other player on that roster that if you speak up about something controversial, if you express a viewpoint that doesn't align with what certain people want you to believe, you're going to be isolated. What resources does the league provide for players dealing with hate and negativity online and in person? Sophie herself addressed that question in an interview, saying that the league doesn't really do much, and that at the end of the day, you're in the entertainment business and you have to have mental toughness. You have to expect it. But here's the thing, there's a difference between dealing with criticism from the public and dealing with isolation from your own organization. One is part of the job when you're a public figure. The other is a failure of leadership. And that's what happened to Sophie. She got booed at home, and her own team couldn't even step up to defend her. Not because they disagreed with what she said necessarily, but because it was easier not to. It was easier to say nothing. It was easier to let her take the hit alone. It was easier to pretend like the booing wasn't really a reflection of anything the organization should address. That's not leadership. That's cowardice dressed up in the language of organizational statements and platform management. This is the moment where you have to stop treating everything that's happened as isolated incidents and start seeing them for what they actually are, a pattern. And not just a pattern that emerged over a week or two, but something that's been building for much longer than that. Because Sophie Cunningham wasn't the first time the Fever organization chose silence over support when things got uncomfortable. Caitlin Clark, the franchise's rookie phenom who is supposed to transform the league, has been dealing with her own version of being picked apart by media and rival players all year long. She's dealt with physical play that crosses the line into being disrespectful. She's dealt with players taking cheap shots. She's dealt with commentators making questionable remarks about her game and her accomplishments. And what's the front office done? They've been noticeably quiet on defending her too whenever things got uncomfortable. When it came time to stand up for one of their own, the Fever organization has repeatedly chosen to stay quiet and let their players fend for themselves. That's not coincidence. That's not just bad luck with media situations. That's a pattern of organizational behavior that shows how this team actually operates when things get messy. They don't lead. They disappear. They don't defend their players. They hope the story goes away on its own. What happens when fans and other players see that pattern? They start to think that maybe defending yourself is your own job. They start to understand that you can't count on your organization to have your back. They see a front office that would rather avoid controversy than actually take a stand on anything. And that changes how everyone in that building operates. It creates an environment where players feel isolated instead of supported, where speaking up is discouraged instead of encouraged, where the safest move is always to keep your mouth shut and hope nobody asks you anything difficult. Sophie learned that lesson the hard way. She spoke up. She stood by what she said. And she got punished for it, not with a direct punishment that the organization would have to defend, but with subtle ones that could all be explained away as basketball decisions. Reduced minutes, a lack of public support, her own coach walking out when asked directly about her. These are the kinds of things that destroy player confidence and team culture from the inside. They're the kinds of decisions that make players distrust the people who are supposed to be leading them. And here's what makes it even worse. Other players are watching. Caitlin Clark is watching. Everyone on that roster is watching to see how the organization handles Sophie. They're asking themselves what happens if they say something controversial next. They're wondering whether their own coaches would defend them or walk out of a room. They're calculating the risk of speaking their minds versus the safety of staying quiet. That's the environment that gets created when leadership fails this dramatically. Fans have been paying attention to how this front office handles controversy for weeks now, and they're starting to run out of patience with the excuses. Every time something controversial happens, there's a no-comment moment. Every time a player needs backing, the organization finds a way to be unavailable. Every time leadership is required, someone chooses silence instead. You can only chalk that up to coincidence so many times before people start asking whether this coaching staff and front office actually have their players' backs at all, or whether they'd just rather wait for stories to blow over on their own. The pattern suggests the latter, and that's a problem that goes way beyond Sophie Cunningham or any single controversy. It's about what kind of organization the Fever actually are. Are they a place where players feel supported and empowered to be themselves? Or are they a place where you're expected to keep your head down, stay quiet, and hope nobody asks you anything difficult? Based on what's played out this season, it's looking more and more like the second one. And that's not a sustainable way to build a winning team or a healthy locker room culture. Sophie didn't ask for any of this. She just answered a question honestly. But by refusing to defend her, by choosing silence instead of support, by allowing her to be booed at home without intervention, the Fever organization has sent a clear message about who they are and what they value. And Sophie's left carrying the weight of that failure while still being expected to show up every night and perform at a high level. Here's what's striking about this entire situation if you step back and look at it clearly. On one side, you have Sophie Cunningham. She answered a question honestly when asked. She was pressured to walk it back, and instead of doing that, she said, "I said what I said." She got dragged through the media, her playing time got quietly reduced, she got booed at her own home arena, and not once did she lash out. She didn't go on a rant. She didn't call out her coach publicly. She didn't demand anything from the front office in front of cameras. She just kept showing up. She kept playing. She kept answering questions honestly, even when the easier thing would have been to give some safe, forgettable non-answer, like the one her own coach gave when it mattered most. On the other side, you have Stephanie White. When faced with a straightforward question about her own players' public comments, she froze up. She gave a bunch of word salad about not being educated enough on the science of the issue. She talked about various levels of sport and different governing bodies. She basically said nothing while using a lot of words to do it. And then, when even that didn't work, when she realized that people could see right through what she was doing, she just left. She walked out of the room while the cameras were rolling. She physically removed herself from the situation rather than say a single supportive sentence about Sophie Cunningham. That contrast alone tells you everything you need to know about who's actually handling this situation with class and who isn't. It's not even close. Sophie has shown more character in dealing with the fallout from her comments than her own coach has shown in dealing with being asked about them. And that's not a small thing. That's the kind of contrast that defines how people see a situation. Because now every time someone watches a clip of Stephanie White walking out, they're going to think about Sophie standing there and taking it. Every time they read about Sophie's minutes being reduced, they're going to think about how she never complained about it. Every time they see her get booed and respond with professionalism, they're going to see the exact opposite in what her coach did. Fans have noticed that contrast too. Scroll through comment sections under clips of Sophie playing, and you'll find way more people defending her than criticizing her. That tells you that the boos in the arena aren't representative of how most fans actually feel about her. A vocal minority making noise in a stadium doesn't always match what's actually happening online or in the broader fanbase. Support for Sophie has honestly been pretty steady since this whole thing started, even as the story has evolved and gotten more complicated. People respect her for standing by what she believes. They respect her for not backing down when pushed. They respect her for not attacking anyone or being reckless with her words. Compare that to how people are viewing Stephanie White's walkout. It's become a symbol of organizational failure. Every time someone brings up this controversy, they mention the moment when the coach couldn't even stay in the room long enough to answer a question about her own player. It's the thing that people remember, the image that defines this whole situation. And that's going to follow her and the organization around for a long time, because it wasn't just about avoiding an uncomfortable question. It was about choosing avoidance over accountability at the exact moment when someone on her team needed support the most. At some point, you have to ask what message that walkout actually sends to the rest of the locker room. If speaking honestly, calmly, and without attacking a single person gets you a booed reputation in the media and radio silence from your own coach, why would any other player on that roster feel safe doing the same thing the next time a reporter asks them something uncomfortable? That's not a small question either. That's the kind of thing that shapes how an entire team operates behind closed doors for years. It sets the tone for what's acceptable in that organization. It tells players what kind of leadership they can actually count on. Right now, based on everything that's played out over the last few weeks, Sophie Cunningham isn't getting that leadership from anybody in Indiana's organization. She's getting booed at home. She's getting benched in close games. She's getting ignored by her own coach in front of the cameras. And somehow, she's still showing up every night with the same energy she's always played with. If anything, that says way more about her character than it does about anyone else involved in this whole mess. She's been the one showing what real leadership looks like, and she's just a player, not the one who's supposed to be leading the team. Just when you thought this situation had hit its lowest point, things managed to get worse in ways that nobody saw coming. Because while Sophie was dealing with the reduced minutes and the organizational silence, something else was brewing that would add another layer of complexity to an already complicated situation. Pro-women activists started planning rallies at WNBA games in key cities to show their support for Sophie after she spoke out against biological males competing in women's sports. They were calling it Sophie Night. It wasn't an organized effort from the league or the team. It was grassroots support from fans and activists who saw a young player being treated unfairly and decided to stand up for her. But then came an incident that shocked everyone and made clear just how deep the divide had become on this issue. Two teenage girls, fans of Sophie, went to a Seattle Storm game versus the Fever wearing pro-women's sports gear. Just XX and XY t-shirts. Nothing offensive, nothing crude, just a simple statement of support for Sophie's position. And according to what happened next, they got confronted for it by Celeste Catton, a co-owner of the Seattle Storm. Not asked nicely to leave, not even told their shirts weren't appropriate. According to the teenagers, Catton cursed at them, yelled at them, berated them for daring to wear pro-women's sports gear to a women's basketball game. One of the teens is now speaking out about the exchange, saying she was shocked and disappointed. Here she is, a young girl just trying to have fun and support a player she believed in, and she got attacked by someone in a position of power at the league. She said it was particularly disappointing because Catton is also a woman. The implication being that you'd expect some solidarity there, some understanding of what it means to be a girl trying to advocate for the protection of women's sports. But instead she got hostility. She got cursed at. She got made to feel unwelcome at a women's basketball game because of the shirt she wore. Catton ended up getting fined and suspended from attending the team's next 5 home games, but notably, she hasn't issued an apology. The league reached out for a statement and got nothing back. The Seattle Storm released a statement saying they respect the league's decision to fine and suspend her and remain committed to creating a welcoming environment. But again, those are just words. The action was a co-owner verbally attacking a teenager for supporting women's sports. The response from the organization was a fine and suspension, and there was no personal accountability from the person involved. This incident added fuel to an already burning fire because it showed that this wasn't just about coaches and media handling things poorly. It was about leadership at multiple levels of the league, choosing a particular side, and then punishing people who didn't align with that position. A teenager got attacked for wearing a shirt. A player got benched for speaking her mind. A coach walked out rather than defend her own player. And at every level, the people in charge were making choices that sent the message that Sophie's position wasn't welcome in this league. The rally outside the Motive Center before a Portland game showed just how much support Sophie actually had beyond what the booing in arenas might suggest. Several people gathered outside to rally in support of her position, and counter-demonstrators were also there to show support for the trans community. It was peaceful, it was organized, it was exactly the kind of discourse that should be happening in a free society. But it also made visible the fact that this wasn't some fringe position that nobody believed in. Hundreds of people came out to say they supported Sophie and the idea that women's sports should remain female-only. What all of this escalation did was put Sophie in an impossible position. She'd spoken her mind. She'd stood by what she said. And now she was becoming the symbol for an entire movement, whether she'd asked for that or not. She never wanted to become the face of this debate. She just answered a question honestly. But now there were rallies in her name, there were teenagers showing up at games in her support, there were activists organizing around her position. And through it all, her own organization was still sitting quietly, still refusing to defend her, still allowing her to carry this weight alone. The intensity of the public response, the way this had blown up into something so much bigger than just one player's comments, meant that this wasn't going to blow over quietly. Usually controversies like this fade after a few weeks. People move on. The news cycle shifts. But this one had legs. It had real passion behind it from both sides. And Sophie was stuck in the middle, still showing up to play basketball while the world had a heated debate around her. At the end of all of this, there's one question that nobody in the Indiana Fever organization has actually addressed directly, and it's the question that matters the most. What does it mean to be a leader when your player stands up and speaks her mind, and instead of supporting her or at least defending her publicly, you walk out of a room? What does that say about your organization? What does that say about your values? Nobody's saying that Stephanie White owes Sophie a passionate speech defending every word she said. Nobody's saying that the coach needed to go on cable news and make this her personal crusade. But here's the thing, walking out of a room rather than saying literally anything at all is its own kind of statement, whether White meant it that way or not. And that statement got heard loud and clear by everyone who saw it. Fans caught it immediately, clipped it, shared it, and now it's everywhere, and it's going to keep following both of them until somebody in that building actually addresses it directly instead of walking away from the question one more time. The Fever organization had multiple opportunities to fix this. After the walkout happened, they could have released a statement clarifying that Stephanie White supports her players and their right to speak. They could have had the coach go on record saying that she stands by Sophie. They could have given an interview where White explained what actually happened in that press conference and why she reacted the way she did. Any of those things could have changed the narrative. Any of those things could have salvaged the situation and moved forward from it. But they didn't do any of that. Instead, they went silent. They let the clip spread. They let people interpret the walkout as they wanted to. And every time there was a chance to address it, someone chose to say nothing instead. That silence is its own kind of answer. When you have the power to clarify something and you choose not to, you're essentially confirming what people already think happened. You're confirming that the organization is uncomfortable with what Sophie said. You're confirming that you're not willing to defend her. You're confirming that it's easier to just let this situation play out than to actually take a stand. What's frustrating for fans watching this is that the fix really is simple. Somebody in that organization needs to stand up in front of a camera and say something supportive about Sophie Cunningham. Not vague, not rushed, not another walkout moment for people to clip and share. Just something clear and direct that says, we support our players speaking their minds and we support Sophie. That's it. That would change the entire trajectory of this story, but apparently that's too much to ask. Until that happens, every empty non-answer and every quiet minute cut from her rotation is going to get measured against the week her own coach couldn't even stay in the room long enough to answer a basic question about her. Because here's the thing that gets lost in all the headlines and all the debate about whether Sophie's position is right or wrong. Sophie Cunningham isn't asking for special treatment. She's not asking for a pass on accountability. She's not asking for anything extraordinary. She's asking to be heard the same way anyone else on that roster gets heard. She's asking to still get to play the game she's clearly earned her spot in. She's asking for her organization to have her back when things get difficult. Those are basic things. Those are things that any coach and any organization should provide to their players. But right now, based on everything fans have watched unfold this past month, Sophie isn't getting any of those things. She's not getting heard because her coach walked out instead of talking. She's not getting to play because her minutes got reduced after she spoke up. She's not getting organizational support because the only response has been silence. And until Indiana's coaching staff actually addresses that directly, this story isn't going anywhere. It's going to keep following them. Every time Stephanie White does an interview, people are going to ask about the walkout. Every time Sophie gets benched, people are going to question whether it's basketball or punishment. Every time there's media coverage of the team, this controversy is going to be right there in the background. The Fever had a chance to handle this like professionals. They had a chance to show what real leadership looks like. But instead, they chose silence. And now they're going to keep dealing with the consequences of that choice. The Sophie Cunningham controversy isn't really about whether her position on women's sports is right or wrong anymore. That's a legitimate debate that people can have. What it's actually about is what happens when an organization fails its players at the exact moment they need support the most. It's about a coach who walked out instead of defending her own player. It's about minutes that disappeared without explanation. It's about a player getting booed at home while her organization said nothing. It's about a pattern of silence that sent a clear message: speak up and you're on your own. Sophie showed more courage standing by her words than the people leading her organization showed in defending her. That's not normal in professional sports. Usually leadership rises to meet the moment. But not here. Not this time. The question now is whether the Fever organization will ever actually address this directly or whether they'll just keep hoping it goes away. Based on what we've seen so far, the answer doesn't look promising. And that says everything about the state of leadership in the WNBA right now.